For millions of years, great storms have battered Canada's west coast. Here, life is the epitome of living on the edge and living with the weather. Now forecasters are tracking a new kind of storm that modern weather technologies have only begun to understand. And when they'll blow next remains a mystery. 24th, 2001. The fishing vessel Kell was 20 kilometers off the northern tip of Vancouver Island. The winds were storm force, but Captain George Newson wasn't worried. He and his crew had seen this kind of weather before. What they didn't see coming was a fisherman's worst nightmare.
It was around 12 midnight, and all of a sudden I awoke to a pretty big sort of a crash. I pushed myself sort of through the dark and up the companionway to see what was going on. And there George was standing at the wheel, and I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "We're in a hurricane." I figured something was definitely wrong, you know.
What they called a hurricane was in fact a weather bomb, a much more dangerous phenomenon. Weather bombs form quickly, strike almost without warning, and can catch ill-fated sailors totally unprepared. The west coast of Vancouver Island is the ultimate edge. A speed bump on the rim of the largest, deepest ocean in the world. Out there, 8,000 kilometers due west, is Japan. The Pacific is known as nature's cauldron, and weather brewed in its mighty belly stops for nothing until it collides with this rugged coast. And winter can always be relied upon to deliver the worst of it. That's when cold Arctic air flowing south from the Aleutian Islands and warm tropical air flowing north from Hawaii clash 1,000 kilometers offshore to create the perfect recipe for perfect storms. From October to March, these massive weather systems form and flow constantly, dominating Canada's entire west coast with storm, even hurricane-force winds. Damage can be catastrophic. Roofs ripped from buildings, trees and power lines knocked down, and ships lost at sea. To predict when and where the wrath of God will strike next is the job of the weatherman. Owen Lang is a marine meteorologist at Environment Canada's Pacific Weather Centre in Vancouver.
Forecasting for BC is difficult, mainly because it is sitting on the edge of a large ocean, and it has very rich topography along the coastline. All the coastal mountains change the weather systems as they come onto the coast, so that we may all be seeing something on our satellite imagery offshore and on our computer models. But once they start interacting with the coast itself, it quite often it changes significantly, and so it's always a bit of a challenge.
In the last century, the weatherman's job has changed dramatically, evolving from a crude network of daily observations handwritten in logs to a complex array of high and low-tech tools that today form a worldwide meteorological web.
It comes from all over the place. It's quite a large collection. The actual organizing of the data is very complex, and it's sort of beyond me. It's like a maze if you try to follow all the data streams. It is really quite impressive.
Weather ships, aircraft, radar, weather balloons equipped with radiosondes, and weather buoys all record real-time climate and weather conditions, and then uplink the data to polar orbiting and geostationary satellites. Surface stations like Vancouver's Weather Centre download this data and then interpret it for their specific region. In the last 20 years, new satellite and weather buoy technologies have dramatically increased the accuracy of marine forecasts by filling in the information gap with even more frequent updates. Yet this complex, high-tech web still has holes in it.
In the middle, there is not much information other than satellite data. So we sometimes refer to this as the data sandwich. We have observations at the surface and high aloft, but not in the middle. And of course, that's where storms develop, is in the middle atmosphere to a large extent. So this missing data is critically important to us, and it's one of the reasons why we have special problems forecasting for the West Coast.
For fishermen especially, an accurate forecast can make the difference between dropping a line one last time or calling it quits for the day.
Do you know when you'll be going?
Owen Lang even has fishermen call him directly, looking for that extra bite of first-hand weather information.
Winds will be southerly.
George Newson called Owen a lot.
That could make it a little bit lumpy.
George Newson was a third-generation fisherman. He was born a salty dog and loved his life on the sea. He was also known as a driven man, and when other boats headed for port, George would keep the Kellerlee out, hoping to catch the last of a weather window and the last fish. Paul Sport learned everything he knew about the sea from George, and over the past 20 years, he too had seen his fair share of storms, but this year had been different.
It was one of those seasons the weather was really making it tough for guys to catch fish that year. The systems were coming in one right after another.
Jan van den Dries, another experienced fisherman and a family friend, rounded out the crew. As the Kellerlee prepared to depart, Captain George Newson knew bad weather was brewing, and at the last minute, he decided to hire an extra hand. Young, inexperienced Beecham Engelmark.
I didn't really realize where we were going. We were going deep. It was kind of offshore, you know, so close to 100 miles out, I think.
The Kellerlee left port well prepared, but George Newson, a sentimental, even superstitious fisherman, had forgotten one last important detail.
I didn't speak to him that day. It was a routine that we had to always resolve our differences and for me to kiss him goodbye. When he left for that trip, it was the only time that I recall not kissing him.
The 500 kilometers of Vancouver Island's west coast are wild, remote, beautiful. Tofino, one of a handful of towns on the island's west side, is a place you rarely end up in by accident. The 8,000-kilometer-long Trans-Canada Highway ends here. But Tofino does have a unique reputation for luring those searching for unspoiled simplicity. In the past, when winter turned her cold shoulder to the coast, Tofino used to be as quiet as any tourist town. But not anymore.
This is the perfect storm cruise. Amazing, the power of it.
That probably weighs 400 or 500 pounds, and it was just thrown up there within the last 5 days.
Today, the destructive fury of wind and waves has inspired a new breed of tourist, the winter storm watcher. One of the first to acknowledge the fundamental allure of storm watching was Charles McDermott. The son of Tofino's first doctor, Charles grew up watching Pacific winter storms.
Well, storms, I think, have a magical hold on people, especially because today so many people live in an urban environment. To watch a storm approaching from the southeast, to see the waves building and the rain start first as a little squall and then pounding to driven by 80-mile-an-hour winds horizontally and 30-foot waves, well, that's an experience that lets people know Mother Nature still is in charge, and I think people relish that.
Charles left Tofino for college and then a career managing hotels around the world. But in the early 1990s, he and his family decided to build a hotel of their own. A hotel like no other.
Our family had a long-time dream to one day build the Wickaninnish Inn.
From the ground up, the Wickaninnish Inn was designed to showcase the drama of a Pacific winter storm. The Banks thought they were crazy, but the McDermotts believed bad weather was good business. And if they built it, guests would come.
It's supposed to be storm season, so we came down for that.
Most people go and lie on beaches in Florida or dream of that for a vacation, but storms are equally part of nature, and without them, you probably wouldn't have the sunny beaches anyway.
You know, for us, winter storm watching was part of the plan from before we started construction. It was part of the design. It was part of what we thought would make the place a great place to be. And so every view from every window, every angle was covered, every chance to see the open ocean, to see the storms at their best, to see the waves and see the beach and see and experience the rain at the same time.
Turns out the McDermotts were right. The Wickaninnish Inn was an instant success, enticing eager urban refugees to the ragged edge of nature without giving up the trappings of civilization.
You walk in out of nature and watch the storm roll in with a beautiful glass of Cabernet, and not much can be better than that.
But for some, close to the edge isn't close enough.
Secret spot.
Yeah, the secret spot.
Jeremy Koreski and Raf Bruweiler get their adrenaline fix not by watching waves, but riding them. Born and raised in Tofino, they too could have left. But why would they? This is one of the best spots in the world to surf. But forget suntans and California dreaming. The surf's up here when the weather turns nasty, and winter storm surges deliver huge waves right to Tofino's front door.
Yeah, there's a good little wave right there. Head over there. Yeah, you basically got to be really dedicated to surf in Canada. You got to be willing to do it. Put on your big, thick wetsuit every day and jump out in the cold water, and but it's worth it after you get a good ride. It's all worth it.
To find the perfect wave, Raf and Jeremy depend on the same technology as the weatherman. Accessing data from weather buoys and satellites, they can track ocean storms as far as 5,000 kilometers away.
5 or 6 feet for tomorrow.
3 days, it's going to be big. Good.
When this storm surge hits Tofino, it could mean walls of water 20 feet or higher.
Check the period.
A challenge big enough and tall enough for any surfer.
Typhoon.
Extreme winter surfing has even spawned a new business, extreme winter surfing videos. While Raf surfs, Jeremy floats inside the waves. And then takes a beating to get the best shots. In fitting fashion, Jeremy called his first video Numb. And so far he's sold almost 10,000 copies. The ocean here may be cold, but the surfing is hot. And it too has attracted a new wave of tourists, called Tofino, the Malibu of the North.
It's getting pretty busy in Tofino here, and I don't really mind sharing waves as long as I can get my share of waves, and I'm sure I always will be able to.
Knowing both the secrets of the storm and the best beaches helps Raph and Jeremy catch the biggest waves. It also keeps them out of trouble. But for those just passing through, if they're not careful, will often get more than they paid for.
Those people should not be going out right now. They're learning to surf, and it's not the best spot to stay, stupid tourists.
The big surf of the Northwest is seductive and dangerous. A failure to realize that only nature calls the shots here is a recipe for disaster. Dan Vidova is Pacific Rim National Park's public safety officer. Too often he's seen people gamble with the sea and lose.
Just a few years ago, were 6 people who were caught by the first wave in that set from a storm system that was thousands of miles away. And a fellow got swept off the rocks and came into a surge channel just behind us. The group went down to try and help him when another wave came in and 2 more were killed.
In the past 30 years, 16 people who ventured too close to the edge have been dragged into the sea and drowned.
As incredibly beautiful as it is here, it can also be as equally dangerous.
But for West Coast fishermen, living on the edge is just part of everyday life. After a successful first run, the Kell returned to port to unload its catch. October signals the start of storm season, and George Newsom knew one was brewing just beyond the horizon.
George stayed in pretty constant contact with Owen.
Okay, George, I'm looking at the satellite imagery now, and the system is developing out offshore. It's definitely heading your way.
From what I gathered, I knew there was some pretty stormy weather coming along.
George Newsom had the best information forecasters could offer. Yet he still decided to return to the fishing grounds deep in the Pacific. So far, this storm was just another part of everyday life. The wild, wind-blown west coast of Vancouver Island is dangerous and deceiving. Just offshore and just below the surface lies the graveyard of the Pacific, the final stop for an amazing collection of trawlers, freighters, and passenger liners, all caught in the fury of a Pacific storm. The steamship SS Valencia was one of them. On January 22, 1906, 117 people drowned here, within sight of land. Tom Patterson, the lightkeeper at nearby Cape Beale, watched the disaster unfold and quickly sent a telegraph. Soon rescue ships were steaming to the site, but it wasn't soon enough. Cape Beale's lightkeepers have come and gone, but their duty has remained the same. Guard the light and keep a sharp lookout for the next victim of the Pacific's notorious graveyard. Norbert Brand has kept the light here, the oldest lighthouse on this coast, for 27 years.
Sometimes when a storm comes and it's predicted and it's brewing here at Cape Beale, you can almost feel the souls, the lost souls, I call them, walking.
Perhaps only a lonely soul could sense the spirits here. Cape Beale is one of the last manned lighthouses on Vancouver Island's west coast. Budget cutbacks and automation have replaced the keen eyes of a keeper with computerized beacons and weather stations that monitor wind speed and direction, but not much else.
The mariners have always told the lightkeepers in the past that a human presence is definitely a plus to them, to feel there's somebody out on land by the light watching over them, looking over their shoulder, kind of like a guardian angel almost.
Cape Beale is strategically located on Barkley Sound. Winds here have been recorded at almost 180 kilometers per hour, battering ships at sea, even the lighthouse itself.
When a storm comes in and the sea just changes, the sound changes, the color changes. Actually, even the Cape Beale granite starts vibrating, and the sound actually goes right through the bedrock, and you can almost feel Mother Nature just changing and telling you something is happening.
Years of experience have given Norby an almost uncanny sense of knowing when a storm is brewing. But even he can't predict the most dangerous storms of them all. The ones that blow up so fast they seem to explode, just like a bomb.
You could be sitting there and your pressure on your barometer in the boat is not doing anything, or maybe it's even rising slightly, until the ridge passes by and then the low gets closer. Then all of a sudden the pressure will drop dramatically, and at that point onwards everything happens almost instantly.
By definition, a weather bomb is formed when cold and warm air collide rapidly while creating a weather front. If the front develops into a low which deepens, in weather speak, to more than 24 millibars in less than 24 hours, the result is a swirling miniature hurricane, hard to see coming and even harder to predict. Science calls it explosive cyclogenesis, and the weatherman, a weather bomb.
Especially with our data void upstream, we sometimes miss the important details when they're small scale. We're gradually improving in our ability to predict these, but generally speaking, it's the small marine bombs which are the more dangerous ones, because typically we can't predict them quite as well.
In late October, there was a low developing out offshore, and it did actually deepen to qualify as a very strong bomb. George Newson on the Kell knew the low was developing. I think it was a matter of timing. There's little warning until all of a sudden they're upon you, and then it's almost too late.
You could hear the waves. They sounded like thunder. And then the boat took a hard roll to starboard. Things were pretty chaotic. Beecham came up into the wheelhouse and
I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "We're in a hurricane." Then it kind of all started dawning on me that some water coming in the companionway door at the back of the boat by the galley.
A second wave washed over the Kellerly's stern, swamping it. As the boat began to sink, George Newson had time to make a mayday call and then abandon ship.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the Kellerly.
His mayday was received and quickly passed on to the Rescue Coordination Center in Victoria.
Roger, what is your position, course, and speed?
And immediately, Coast Guard and military search and rescue teams sprang into action. Just around the corner from the Cape Beale Lighthouse is the Canadian Coast Guard's first line of defense in the Pacific. Born of history and necessity, the Banfield Lifeboat Station has one mission that rules all: saving lives. And when the worst that West Coast weather can offer forces even the hardiest sailors into port, the Coast Guard heads out to sea. This highly trained team of rescue specialists is on constant standby to answer any distress call.
Well, there's a fair amount of traffic in this area, and the weather is fairly extreme. And if people do get in trouble out there, it's nice to know that there's someone here that can come out and help them, and that's what we're here for.
The Coast Guard has called Banfield home since 1908, a direct result of the Valencia disaster 2 years earlier. Banfield was the first station in Canada to use motorized lifeboats. Today, intense training and high-tech tools are their preferred weapons to battle the weather.
Swimmer in the water. Okay, going in. Okay, stand by Tofino.
Team members come from a variety of backgrounds. Rescue specialist Steve Oakes had a previous life in the military, while Don Amos has spent his entire career with the Coast Guard.
Oh, it's a good feeling to go out and help people out, you know. I love being on the water. I'm from the West Coast, so I'm a lifer here.
And life as a rescue specialist on the jagged edge of the Pacific means working in some of the angriest weather on Earth.
You get out in 30-foot seas out there, and it's an eye-opener because you're up and down and sideways in every direction. I don't want to go out in anything worse, but I will. If we have to, we will.
To combat the power of the Pacific, the Coast Guard depends on fast, flat-hulled, inflatable Zodiacs for coastal rescue missions. But to go faster and deeper into the Pacific, they needed a new weapon. These high-tech, high-speed, aluminum-hulled 47-foot lifeboats were built to the specifications of frontline specialists like Steve Oakes.
I personally am impressed with this boat over what we used to have, which was a 44-foot steel boat, and it only did 9 knots. This boat can get us there a lot quicker. It does about 25 knots.
3 times faster than its predecessor, this state-of-the-art lifeboat has a key design element that helps prevent it from becoming another victim of the graveyard of the Pacific. If this boat gets swamped in heavy seas, it can right itself in just under 6 seconds. But the Pacific Ocean is a big beat to cover, one the Coast Guard can't do alone. So when it can't get there by sea, airborne rescue takes over. Canada's military search and rescue technicians, or SARTECs, share the Coast Guard's primary objective of saving lives. 442 Squadron, based in Comox on Vancouver Island's east coast, can deploy their SARTECs at a moment's notice. But rescue by sea is still the first line of defense, and the Coast Guard specialists at Banfield are the best of the best. They're so good, they're now famous for their riot school, or rigid hull inflatable operator training. Teams from all over the world come here to learn how to operate Zodiacs in the toughest conditions.
We train a lot of different agencies, police forces, other government agencies, parks, U.S. Coast Guard, Canadian military, a vast array of different agencies.
Training, training, and more training. It's all in a day's work. Here, storms are just as certain as death and taxes.
You have to be prepared for the weather to get worse. And that's the way we look at things. We prepare for the worst scenario.
And on the night of October 25th, 2001, the worst scenario was happening. Caught in a weather bomb, the Kell was going down. The crew scrambled into immersion suits that would protect them from the cold North Pacific. Beecham Engelmark grabbed a flashlight. On deck, they struggled to deploy their life raft. Finally, the 4 men jumped from their sinking ship. Beecham Engelmark never made it to the raft. And And while the others tried desperately to stay inside it, waves kept flipping it over again and again. Once, when the raft surfaced, Paul Stewart found himself inside, all alone. But in the darkness, Beecham found George Newsom. George was wearing only a flotation suit that wouldn't protect him from the cold ocean for long. Beecham hung on to him tightly as the two drifted in the towering swells. Alone in the raft, all Paul Stewart could do was search helplessly for his shipmates, who were floating somewhere out there. It was just after midnight, October 25th, 2001. George Newsom's Mayday had set in motion a search and rescue mission that began at the Rescue Coordination Center in Victoria, British Columbia.
We got the call from RCC that fishing boat in distress somewhere north of Cape Scott. They got positioned, so I said, yeah, I'll accept the mission. We launched the crew.
The storm was producing gusts of up to 163 kilometers an hour. Yet the Buffalo still took off. Its mission was to search for survivors. Rescue would be the Coast Guard's job. The John P. Tully was already on duty, patrolling an area about 100 kilometers south of the Kell-Lee's last coordinates. When the Mayday call came in, Captain Paul Frost responded immediately.
Got a good position on it. So the normal procedures, you get the second engine online and head for the scene with all speed possible.
The problem was, the Tully wasn't a fast 47-footer. Its top speed was 7 knots and would take hours to arrive on site. The fate of the Kell-Lee's crew didn't look good.
Flew up there, did a cloud break over the water, flew to the last known position. The ocean was nothing but white foam, spray blowing off the tops of the waves. With that type of winds are probably at least 90 knots, which is what about 135, 140 mile an hour.
But incredibly, shining like a beacon in the pitch black ocean below, they spotted a light.
And it was flashing, and it was doing other than just bobbing around. So we figured that we're making an assumption this is a person in the water.
In fact, there were 2 people. Beecham was yelling and waving his flashlight at the aircraft above. He knew time was running out for George, who wouldn't survive the cold much longer, wearing only a flotation suit. As the Buffalo circled above, Beecham watched helplessly as George succumbed to hypothermia and died in his arms.
I held him tightly for quite a while, just in hope that maybe he'd kind of come back, but that wasn't going to happen. I decided to, release him from my arms because it was just too strenuous on me, mentally and physically.
The Buffalo had been airborne for 5 hours, and with fuel reserves now dangerously low, the crew had no choice but to break off the search. But before leaving, they dropped a radio transmitter attached to a marker buoy. It would drift at about the same rate as the survivors and help the aircraft home in on their location when it returned.
The plane had left just around when George had passed away, so, those 2 things for me were just a total feeling of loneliness out there on this big sort of black sea.
But Beecham wasn't alone. Paul Stewart was also in a life and death struggle with the storm.
You're inside the life raft and you're just like in a dryer, tumbling around. Like a couple times it left me upside down in the life raft, and I get kind of scared that I'd get washed out or felt kind of hopeless.
Being there, experiencing what the ocean was like, how violent it was, but how beautiful it was at the same time was an an awe-inspiring experience. It really was, you know. They were so big, I couldn't really wrap my mind around it. And all I could see around me is water all above me. I mean, it was, the size was huge.
Incredibly, Beecham had survived almost 7 hours in the open ocean when, just before dawn, the John P. Tully arrived on site.
I just remember coming up and seeing something on the horizon and kind of lost it in between some swells, and then it came up and all of a sudden I seen green and a red light, which marks port and starboard. I felt like I was saved, you know, I felt I'm gonna make it.
The only thing we saw was a light. That was one of the things that Beecham really did well, was that he had the presence not only to get his survival suit on, but he took an additional flashlight along, so as well as the light that's on the suits, he had a flashlight, waterproof flashlight.
The Tully's crew could see Beecham, but could they rescue him? A Zodiac was launched into the raging sea, a dangerous challenge. But training paid off. The Zodiac zeroed in on Beecham's flashlight beam and hauled him to safety. But was Beecham the only survivor? At 4 p.m., 16 hours after the weather bomb had struck the Kell, a buffalo spotted Paul Sport's life raft. It had drifted over 100 kilometers in the storm, but Paul was still inside, and now waving to the aircraft above.
I heard him fly overhead, and I heard him start to circle, and I thought, hey, there he is. He's finally here.
But Paul's ordeal wasn't over yet. Only a helicopter could save him from the angry sea.
It seemed to take quite a while, but eventually the helicopter came. They sent a frogman down. Asked me to leave the life raft and get in the water. And then he went underwater, put the harness that goes around your waist, and the hoist pulls us both up at the same time.
Sport was hoisted to safety. The Coast Guard was retrieving the bodies of Jan Vandendries and George Newson. Luck, skill, training, and the will to live had all combined to make this rescue a bittersweet success. On the same fall day in 2001, George Newson and his friend Jan Vandendries were buried in Comox, British Columbia. Today, the survivors of the Kell disaster are still coming to terms with the weather bomb that killed their mates.
It's just unbelievable for a guy like George to be gone.
For Paul Sport, a fisherman for 20 years, 16 hours in a life raft changed his life forever.
I don't think I'll ever go back on the water again. I don't know why. As time passes, it's kind of nice because it eases the pain of what went on.
Now Paul intends to spend the rest of his life with his feet planted firmly on solid ground. He has a new and much safer job and plans to spend a lot more time with his wife and kids. 7 hours in the raging open ocean rubbed off on Beecham Engelmark too. He touched the void and lived to tell the tale.
How do I feel about the ocean now? I'm really comfortable with it, you know?
Today, he and his wife Amy are almost finished restoring a vintage schooner that will be their new home. Beecham doesn't fear the sea, just respects it and life in a new way.
In a sense, I do feel like I kind of looked death in the eye, I guess you could say, you know? It was that close, you know? You want to take this? I'm gonna check the weather.
The loss of the Kell and 2 of her crew was also felt at the Pacific Weather Center in Vancouver.
I was deeply affected by it, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he was working on my forecast, and I couldn't help but be significantly impacted by it.
Owen Lang had forecast the weather that day to the best of his ability. But today, he still struggles with a sense of accountability.
At George's funeral, I met one of the fellows who survived. And I went with a hope of sort of bringing some sort of solace to my my state of soul sort of thing, I guess you could say. Not really expecting that I would do it, but I spoke to Beach, and he said something to me which was important for me.
I remember saying to Owen, you know, you're not the weather, you're just the weatherman, and that you did what you could do, and you know, we made our decision to do what we had to do, and events turned because they just did, you know.
George knew that, and he didn't blame me for that, and that I found that comforting.
In the age of sail, sudden, ferocious storms off Vancouver Island's west coast were considered freak incidents. Their explosive wrath just another part of life on the legendary graveyard at the Pacific. Today, meteorologists can observe and study the weather bomb phenomena scientifically, but they still can't accurately predict when or even if they'll explode. For now, this graveyard stays open. And on the open ocean, countless vessels, oil tankers, cruise ships, and hundreds of fishing boats like the Kell stay tuned for daily marine forecasts. But like the one given to George Newson, they too remain only a very educated guess. Even with constant technological advancements, forecasts are only about 80% accurate. Out there, the data void still exists. And so, around the world, efforts to improve the weather network and to decipher the amazing complexities of our Earth's dynamic atmosphere continue. Today, 12 countries, including Canada, have joined forces to breach the void in the vast Pacific Ocean. Even a 1% increase in the accuracy of a forecast could save billions of dollars and countless lives. Due west of Vancouver Island, a storm is brewing right now. While Norbert Brand maintains his lonely vigil, high atop one of the last manned lighthouses on the island's west coast. Next door, at the Bamfield Lifeboat Station, Canadian Coast Guard rescue specialists continue to train for a mayday call that could come at any time. And in Tofino, a new breed of storm watchers, either in the comfort of the Wickaninnish Inn or out in the break zone, keep their own sharp lookout for the next big wave rolling in from Japan. Out here, on the raw, extreme edge of our world, the forces of nature are too powerful to ignore and sometimes understand. Beautiful, but dangerous, Pacific winter storms humble and fascinate us all. Here, and perhaps only here, you too can touch the void.